Irish Media Network. We entertain.
Good evening, folks, and welcome to Irish Media Network Sports Update. I'm your host, Joe Caulfield, and on tonight's episode, we're going to be talking all things rugby and G.A.A. Joining me in the second part of the show is Irish Examiner staff writer Michael Moynihan. As all of you will probably know, there was a special G.A.A. Congress held last Friday at which a management committee was appointed with the power to restructure and formulate the G.A.A. championships going forward, in accordance with government guidelines around public gatherings and so on. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, there's just been an update that gatherings in excess of 5,000 people will be prohibited until at least August of this year. So I'll be chatting to Michael a little bit later on in terms of how that's going to affect the composition of the championships for both club and championship later on in the season. But before that, we're going to be talking rugby. And joining me now is my first guest, two-time European Champions Cup, Pro 14 and Rugby Championship winner, former Leinster, Ireland, Bordeaux, Bristol, and soon-to-be Ulster rugby player, Ian Madigan is on the line with me. Ian, thank you so much for joining me, mate.
Yeah, great to be on. Great to catch up again. Good times back in school.
That's exactly it. I left out the Blackrock honours, but thanks so much for joining me all the way from Bristol. You're obviously still there at the moment.
Yeah, still here. So I'm contracted with Bristol up until the end of June, so I'll be here until then anyway. And unless things change in the meantime, and I'm able to head over to Belfast before then. So lucky that we're well set up here, and I've loved my time here. It's a great city, and yeah.
And I suppose that kind of brings me to my first question. I mean, like in the usual course of events, you've signed a one-year contract with Ulster, and you're probably kind of making the preparation to the transition from everything down to accommodation, meeting the coaching staff, meeting the player group. What would that usual kind of the practical process of that be like?
Yeah, I was lucky that I was able to do a good chunk of that before the lockdown hit. But yeah, usually the player would go over and meet maybe the head coach or the backs coach if you were a back, have a look around the facilities, usually do a medical, which would be pretty thorough, a good one to over going through any previous injuries you have, and that could then have a stipulation within your contract if you were to re-injure that. And then obviously I know a good few of the guys who are playing in Ulster, either from playing against them or playing with them, so caught up with them for a coffee, and then I've just been in contact with them on the phone and helping me suss out a place to live. And it's been really good. They've been really accommodating, and luckily got a lot of it done before the lockdown hit.
Yeah, that's brilliant. As you kind of mentioned there, like Jordy Murphy, Jack McGrath, Martin Moore have all kind of made that transition from Leinster to Ulster in the last kind of season or two. So at least you're going into a player group that and also you're not going to a different hemisphere or to a country where you need to learn the first language and make that integration a bit slower. Like you're effectively coming home now.
Yeah, big time. Like a lot of the guys that are there know me. The coaches have a good idea of my kind of style of play and what I might be able to add. So it'll be much more seamless than, for example, moving to France and having to learn a new language, and even logistically getting all your stuff over there. And you're meeting a squad of 50 new guys and getting to know them all. Like even that itself is something that takes a lot out of you. And then the different type of preseason that you'd be going into, like for example, the one in France was very different to what I would have done previously with Leinster. Whereas at least with Leinster, on a rough guideline what to be expected, what you're
getting yourself into. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So really looking forward to it now. It's very exciting.
And you mentioned it there a little bit. Like I want to talk a little bit about eligibility, because I know it's all really up in the air at the moment. But I was kind of listening to a few podcasts and reading a couple of articles where it was proposed that maybe like the 2019-2020 championship might actually kind of extend into July of this year. If that was to happen, like what's your eligibility to play for Ulster at the end of this season?
Yeah, so basically what I think will happen with this current season is they'll still look to get it completed, albeit at the start of next year's calendar season, so starting on the 1st of July. So you could now, I'm not sure if all the league games, for example, would be completed, and even with the European Cup and the Challenge Cup, they might just go straight to a semi-final and go on the top seed. So basically with contractually, any player who is signed on and is moving to a different club from the 30th of June will move to that club. So, for example, a player like Kyle Sinclair, who's with Harlequins at the moment, he's moving to Bristol. And if the season did continue in July, he would be playing for Bristol potentially against Harlequins.
Yeah.
And then similar for me, if I was, I could potentially finish off if the season was to be finished. I could potentially be finished off with Ulster. Now, I haven't been told that definitively, but I know contractually it will be very, very difficult to be able to extend a contract for a period of time to complete the season. I don't see that happening.
Yeah, I suppose they'd also have to have very defined structures in place that this season will definitely end in July. Like they couldn't do it notionally that we'll say we'll extend it for July, and then depending on that, if the season's extended again, we'll extend again. Like you need to kind of have some definition around when you're going to move.
Yeah, and like one of the big challenges with rugby as well, it's different to Gaelic football, for example. The season is nothing as long, so you can push the Gaelic football season back. I'm sure Michael will go into that in more detail, but the rugby season now, it's not far off being 11 months between, or even 12 months between pre-season time off, international tours, Six Nations, Autumn Internationals, the Lions tour next summer. It's very hard to find the space unless they start going to, Thursday night games where you play Saturday, Thursday, Tuesday, that kind of thing, where you're fitting in, 3 games within 10, 11 days. That's the only way you're going to be able to make up the time. For us, as an example in Bristol, like there's a lot of guys who struggle to play Saturday to Saturday as it is. So it'll be a big reducing that back down by 2-3 days, but I think that's the only way it's going to be able to be compressed.
And can I ask, just in terms of restructuring to kind of to suit the current situation? Like I heard Leo Cullen talking about possibly an inter-provincial series in Ireland. Bill Beaumont was talking about a national championship or nations championship combining the Six Nations and the Southern Hemisphere Rugby Championship. Any insight or that, or what would your opinion be on that? Do you think it could work?
Yeah, I think with the Pro 14, obviously you've got far more travel with the teams from all the different countries playing, whereas with the Premiership you don't have that. All the travel is done on trains and buses, so they will be able to complete their season. But I think to do a hybrid inter-pro home and away series with a semi-final and final, I think soup it up and have all the the top international players playing in it. I think that would be really exciting, and if that was to start off my Ulster career, it would be very exciting and something I'd really look forward to.
Baptism of fire as well, back in playing all the old neighbours. What about behind closed doors? Do you think that could work? Do you think fans would still?
Yeah, I think
interest.
Yeah, I think it's something that we'd see being done if it was, last case scenario kind of thing. The one thing that people probably don't realize, like watching a game on TV when no one's in the crowd is actually not a great product to watch, even on TV. The atmosphere is flawed. Now you can bump it up. You can have the people commentating on the game, or you cut to someone who's saying how the first 15 minutes goes, and then again, and you're trying to get more interaction that way. And I'm sure they'll figure out a way of doing that. But it does really affect it. Like it looks like you're watching a training game in a way.
Yeah.
But like all of this, you adapt to it, and I think having any sport on TV at the moment would be a big bonus.
Better than no sport at all, certainly. So I suppose talking about the move to Ulster, what made you choose Ulster? Because I read an article in January where you're saying you would consider any of the provinces. What attracted you to Ulster specifically?
They're a side that I've always enjoyed playing against. Always really tough fixtures when I was playing in Leinster, and I played against them twice when I was in Bordeaux. And obviously I've kept a close eye on them. I think they play a great brand of rugby. A lot of really good players coming through. The coaching staff that they have there, like Dan McFarland, I had as a coach when I was under 20, and for some of the Ireland A tours, Dwayne Peel's really highly thought of. I was looking up to play with Jared Payne. So, a few familiar faces there. Then I had good conversations with, some of the guys like Jack McGrath and Geordie Murphy, who I played with, and they were saying how much they were enjoying it there, and trying to encourage me to join the team and see where we can go with it.
Yeah, and their style of rugby, like Dan McFarland said that you'd be a great fit for their style of rugby. Like they're really imposing, a really kind of open, expansive, fast type of rugby now, and it's obviously yielded great results for them this year. So it'll be really interesting to see how you fit into that. Any talk about whether it'll be nailed on 10 or 12 and 15 potentially as well?
I'd be open to playing anywhere across the back line, wherever's needed. I'd just be looking to fit into the squad as best as possible. Dan will know my preferred position is 10, and a lot of my training will be angling towards that. But if there's a need for me to play at the back or in the midfield, I'll happily do that.
Okay. And in terms of kind of moving back to Ireland, moving home, are you excited to get back into an Irish dressing room just for the culture, the crack, and the atmosphere?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've loved it. I loved it in France. It's a great group of lads there, and I was lucky to come in to a really, really good group of lads. We have a lot of crack here, and but at the same time, the Irish crack and slagging the legs off each other is something unique. So I probably have to sharpen myself up a bit for that. But no, that's something I definitely look forward to. All right.
Yeah, I'm reminded of an interview Donnacha O'Callaghan did with Tommy Tiernan, having moved from Munster to Ulster after 15 years. And he said, the English, they're great, they're lovely people, but they just don't know how to have the crack, Tommy. So, it'll be a baptism of fire in more than one way for you when you get home.
Yeah. No, it's funny. Brian Burns, obviously over with me now, who was with in Leinster. He's with Bristol till the end of the season, hopefully further. But he was made a few comments on the English lads. Like, for example, if you arrived into the Leinster dressing room with a leather jacket on, everyone would be giving you the whereas you'd see far worse over here, and not a word.
Yeah.
It's unique, and it's a kind of different culture, but it's good as well.
Yeah, and I suppose obviously the kind of great thing about being back in Ireland is that your eligibility to be picked for the national side, and you're coming in at a time when we're blessed with a wealth of talent at 10, particularly like Johnny Sexton, Ross Byrne, Jack Carthy, Joey Carberry, Billy Burns in Ulster. Does that get the competitive juices flowing, or is it more a case of, look, let me get back to Ulster, hammer into position, get comfortable, establish myself, and kind of let my performance stand for itself?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm under no illusions. I don't have any current form in the book. I've played very little in the last 12 months. So I've got to prove myself. But I think with any national team selection, it's current form for your province that really counts. How you're going in the league, how you perform in the early rounds in Europe, leading into the autumn internationals, and for me, it will still be a goal of mine to play for Ireland. It's always been my number one goal.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be aiming to try and get in for autumn, and if that doesn't happen, then I'll be pushing hard to try and get in for the Six Nations. And I think if you're playing in any of the Irish provinces, it has to be your goal to represent the national team. If that's not where your goals lie, you don't deserve to be playing for any of the provinces, in my opinion.
No, it's the only way to look at it, I'd imagine. Can you see a Six Nations being played in 2020?
It'd be a great way to get revenue in the door. It's a fantastic product. Everyone loves watching it. Players love playing in it. It's definitely one way of doing it. At the same time, you want to be very careful not to dilute it as well, though. Doing a Six Nations, let's say, in October, and then doing another one in March, you don't want to affect the product that way as well. But yeah, I know that everyone would be going for it.
Well, look, I hope, apart from anything else, thank you so much for joining us. I really can't wait to see you in Ulster and see how the composition of that back line is enhanced with your being there. Absolute best of luck. Thank you so much for joining us. And look, we'll see you hopefully in a white jersey and certainly possibly a green jersey soon. That was Ian Madigan joining us here on IMN Sports Update. Moving swiftly on to Gaelic games, folks. As I was saying earlier on in the programme, there was a special congress held on Friday to basically appoint a management committee who are going to oversee the restructuring of the championship. Speaking to me about that is my second guest, Michael Moynihan of the Irish Examiners, joined me from Cork to have a discussion on basically how this is going to plan out and play out over the next couple of months of the season. Michael, thank you so much for joining me.
Joe, thanks for having me.
Not at all. Thanks for joining. How's everyone down in Mecca keeping?
Very good. You can see the beard has grown since lockdown. This is the second beard, by the way, shaved off the first one. We're keeping the good side out, same as everybody else. The lockdown is still in force, and people are holding it. So that's good. Hopefully, we're seeing there's some termination coming from this situation.
Yeah. I suppose, look, talking like I started off saying about the special congress there, they appointed a 15-man management committee last Friday with the power to restructure and formulate the championship going forward. First and foremost, why was it important for them to appoint that committee?
Well, look, it's a common criticism of the G.A.A. is that there's too much democracy there, and to get anything done requires a Congress and motions and 2/3 majority, etc. So I think they recognised how extraordinary the circumstances are, and I think they put it out that if they could appoint a committee, which they have, which could maybe move with executive force a little bit quicker to address what's obviously a very fast-moving situation, that would be the right way to go, and it has been. And I mean, as you said earlier, we have seen movement already today with the effective banning of collections of people of over 5,000 people. So the latest I've seen is that the G.A.A. are waiting to consult the government directly about how that will impact on their championship preparations. But to go back to last Friday, if you hadn't had that meeting, this would be filtering back. It would be going to Croke Park. Croke Park would be trying to discuss it with counties and various stakeholders. So I suppose at least the decision-making process is far more streamlined and hopefully more effective now.
Yeah, no, I think they've got like pretty much uniform recognition that it was the right thing to do. That leads kind of a couple of questions arises from that in terms of the practicality of having G.A.A. behind closed doors possibly. So I read your article of Sunday a week ago where you were quoting Stephanie Epstein's Sports Illustrated interview with Zach Binney of Emerson University, and basically the challenges facing having sports at all behind closed doors. So why will having G.A.A. behind closed doors be so difficult in this current climate?
Well, I found that an interesting piece because it reduced everything to first principles, and that's basically until there is a vaccine, there can be very little movement in terms of large gatherings, for the simple reason that we're practicing social distancing in the 2 meters, etc., because we don't want to spread the virus. But obviously, by its nature, a lot of contact sports involve very close physical contact. This isn't even getting into the crowds in the stands. And I thought was interesting was that even with the best will in the world, if a sports organisation, the RFU, G.A.A., whoever, says, look, we'll have something, we'll do it behind closed doors, we keep numbers to a minimum, the issue still is that people are coming to close physical contact. And all that needs to happen is for one person of the 22 or the 30 or however many are playing to be tested positive for the whole deck of cards to collapse. Yeah. And that's just on the sports field. I mean, you're talking, let's say, inter-county GA, you're talking about 2 groups of 50 people, subs, management, support staff, etc. So that's 100 people, say. Even to open a stadium, how many people are you talking about? Security, turnstiles, janitorial security, probably another 100 at least. So
media broadcasting as well, which would need to be.
Yeah, you're adding on and adding on. So the whole time, even with quote unquote nobody at the game, you're talking about hundreds of people who are spreading back out. And if there is a case, that whole deck of cards or house of cards collapses, and you have to start from scratch again. So, to be honest, even though it's being depicted as a kind of a last case scenario, I find it difficult to conjure with behind closed doors in any sport as a viable option.
Yeah, and like I suppose it's particularly difficult with GAA when these people are going back into work on a Monday morning. They're mixing like more so than any other athletes who you could pay them to isolate far more so. It's almost practically impossible with the GAA. And like I read Joe Brolly's article in The Independent there on Saturday where he was talking to Tim Brown, who is a consultant of transplant surgery in City Hospital, and he was saying that GAA is a breeding ground for the virus. Sweating, constantly coming into contact with each other, both on the field and dressing rooms. It allows rapid transmission of COVID-19. And then there's the thing that, so say for instance, everyone on the pitch is fine. They all go home. One of them gets a delivery from someone who thereafter test positive for the COVID, then everyone has to go back into self-isolation. Like, practically, how would you structure it time-wise to ensure it was isolated correctly?
It was interesting to see Major League Baseball talking about bringing all the professional teams to Arizona, to put them up in hotels, keep them isolated. I think there are several stadia there for spring training, so you actually have a little circuit. But again, as you said, the obvious question was, what if they order pizza and the pizza guy has it, and then one of the players gets it? That means the whole thing collapses.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I understand people having a real visceral need for sport and wanting to see sport, but it's not a scenario that stands up to the most basic initial question. How are you going to keep people safe and healthy? How are you going to keep COVID out when we see, professional athletes and, wealthy celebrities, people you would imagine are insulated from most of the ordinary everyday transactions we're involved in, and yet they have it. So, as you say, when people are literally sweating on top of each other, hitting each other, and where it's a virtue to be literally touch tight to somebody, how can you preserve those people's safety?
Yeah, like it's incredibly difficult. And then you add on the financial feasibility of it. So, like, you look at G.A.'s revenue for 2019 was 73.8 million, 36 million of which was taken on the gate, 3 million alone in the All-Ireland replay. Commercial income from media and sponsorship was only 19.9 million. So you're talking about opening Croke Park, for instance, the All-Ireland final. Let's just take that as one-off example. They need to fill like 35 to 40,000 of those seats to even break even. How much of a loss can the G.A.A. stand to take if they were to do it?
Yeah, this is really interesting, and it's not just interesting. It's very ominous for the G.A.A. But I mean, Ian made a very good point earlier, talking, diluting the product and maybe moving the 2026 nations to October, then having the 2021 5 or 6 months after. So there's a couple of really interesting spins to this. One is that if you notice, a lot of sports organizations aren't cancelling their events. They're trying to postpone them. They're trying to maintain the commercial partnership with a broadcaster or a sponsor who, if the sports organization said, our 2020 competition is kaput, we've had to cancel it. Well, that commercial partner might say, well, we provided the money, but you haven't provided your side of the bargain, a sports event, so we're withdrawing our money. So, first of all, I don't think you'll see the G.A.A. declare the championship a dead duck until the government says you do not have permission to run it. So they'll try and keep that alive as long as possible, because those commercial partners are now obviously far more important when there won't be gate receipts coming in. The other side of it is, and again, it was interesting to hear Ian talk about the contract and, the provisions of the contract and say the medical aspect and being healthy and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
I mean, the G.A.A.'s great strength and weakness here is that those commercial partnerships are really the only ones it needs to be concerned about. I spoke to Christy Cooney, the former president, last week, and he said, look, if it's not coming in, it can't go out.
Yeah.
So at a national level, the G.A.A. would have the clout and the political wherewithal, I'm sure, to surf a year maybe where they can arrange some derogation with the banks. What I would be concerned about would be county boards and particularly clubs.
Club level,
which a lot of which are struggling at the moment with stuff like insurance costs in rural areas, depopulation, the kind of suckage of people in towards the east and Dublin in particular. So it's a point I've been making in the Examiner that it's a kind of a cruel cosmic joke that the G.A.A. is front and centre in the volunteer effort to try and help their communities, and yet it may be the organisation which suffers the most financially, because it looks very unlikely that there will be a championship, an intercounty championship as we know it this summer.
In this summer. And can I ask you then, so let's kind of think of happier times. Say if in August, in September, they say, look, we've really reduced this, or a vaccine has been found and proven to be effective. How do you see the reintroduction of G.A.A. Gaelic games from club to All-Ireland level being reintroduced, being restructured? Like, I know the director of comms for the G.A.A., Alan Minton, was speaking recently, and he said, there's kind of two ways of doing it really in terms of the All-Ireland Championship. Way, like, first option is that we have a revert to what it was before the round robin series came in. So no round robin, no Super 8s, just a straight championship with a backdoor, or the second option is basically a straight knockout. How do you think they're going to roll it out when it does come back?
I think the straight knockout option is probably the only one that will work if you want to create any sort of club championship as well. And what people don't realise, I suppose, with the club championship is that that's the funding model for county boards. The county boards need money to survive as well.
Yeah.
So I think you will have to have a club, some form of club activity. The thing with the inter-county level, though, is, and again, this is something people don't consider, is that if there's a declaration on this Friday, look, we've come across a miracle vaccine, so everything can go back to normal on Monday. You're still going to have a 2 or 3 week lead in because, for instance, and someone like Ian would understand this really well, those players, no matter how hard they're training, they will have to train at a particular level to be fit for combat, if you like. Otherwise, you'll see a rash of soft tissue injuries and all this kind of stuff. So let's say we do get to September and there's a kind of an all clear for October, November. That would have to start maybe mid-October and push into November, the senior inter-county championship, because that's the funding model. That's where the money comes in, and that's where the money for the clubs comes in. Yeah. So I could, even though people are saying this is the ideal opportunity for the clubs to be front and centre, I don't really see that happening before the senior inter-county championship, because that is where the money comes in. That's the driver for all of the G.A.A's activities. And you see, the thing is, as you know, people in the G.A.A. are a bit queasy about hearing that about money, because it's obviously fueled by 99.99% volunteers.
Yeah, exactly.
But it also lives in the real world where you do need revenue. And that's not selling your soul. That's just a reality. And I can certainly also see a lot of flexibility and imagination coming in to say concerts and partnerships with other sporting bodies as it tries to get back on its feet financially.
Yeah, well, look, it is something that is very unknowable at the moment. It's great to see that they have taken proactive steps in appointing the management committee. Obviously, today's pronouncement that crowds in excess of 5,000 will be prohibited until August pushes everything back and puts everything in perspective. It is great to see that there are so many initiatives going on in the G.A.A. at the moment. I know the Cork hurlers are doing a run to raise money. The Roscommon footballers doing Shave or Die. Centra and Super Value are doing club together. So, like, it is a time when money is, as you say, a massive practical factor. But it's great to see that the heart and soul of G.A.A. still is in the community, and long may that continue.
Absolutely, and I think you put your finger on it there. I think most people, like 99.99% of people, apart from the usual lunatic fringe, accept that, look, the most important thing is to get through this, losing as few people as possible. Every loss is a huge tragedy, but I think most people would accept that what we were kind of thinking in terms of the numbers maybe aren't quite as high, which is reason for optimism. And sport is taking its place. But it is great, as you say, to see across the board in all sports that the sports people are rowing in and kind of going online with skills challenges and trying to cheer people up, which at the end of the day is what sport is, quote unquote, all about, trying to put a smile on people's face and a bit of distraction.
That's exactly it. Michael, thanks so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. Hope everyone down in Cork is keeping well and we get to speak again in the future.
Not at all, and thanks for having me.
Talk to you soon. So that's it for this week's episode, folks. Thanks so much for watching. Thank you so much to my guests, Ian Madigan and Michael Moynihan. Next week's episode is going to focus solely on UFC and the build-up to UFC 249 Fight Island. We're going to be talking to some of the leading commentators and coaches in the game to give us some insight for that. For now, from everyone at Irish Media Network and myself, of course, please stay safe, look after yourself, be good, and we'll see you next week.
Irish Media Network. We entertain.